Part 2. April 1808. The Bordeaux Blockade. Chapter 14. Anyone who had known John as the miserable, scrawny 12-year-old boy who had so unwillingly joined the crew of the Fearless would have hardly recognised him 6 months later. The thatch of straw-coloured hair that had stuck out in such an unruly way all over his head had grown long and thick, and was now tied at the nape of his neck in a neat sailor's pigtail. He had passed his 13th birthday before Christmas, and had grown hugely, both in inches and in weight. Hard work had developed the beginnings of fine muscles on his shoulders, arms, and chest. His hands, as well as his feet, which was always bare, were knotted with calluses and stained black with the tarry ropes he constantly handled. Without knowing it, he walked the decks with a sailor's roll, and spoke with a sailor's jargon. The Fearless, whose task it was to keep close guard on the mouth of the river Gironde, to prevent any ships from entering or leaving, had spent the long months criss-crossing the river mouth, buffeted by the violent winds and southern storms that blew across the Bay of Biscay. John had been vilely seasick at first, but that had soon passed. He had learned quickly. With Kit's help, he had soon mastered the ropes, even to Mr. Higgins's grudging satisfaction. A few weeks later, he could tie all the knots and splice a rope. By the end of the next month, he could sew his own clothes, and had proved himself a quick learner in the complex skills of gunnery. The iron routine was soon drummed into him. Like the rest of the ship's company, he sprang to obey each order, knowing the harsh discipline that would fall upon him if he delayed by an instant. He scrubbed and washed, blacked the guns with tar and water, and polished brass with brick dust. He was constantly bruised and buffeted, sometimes falling with an unexpected roll of the ship, sometimes receiving an irritated blow from Mr. Torse, or a much harder thwack from Mr. Higgins's rattan cane. He was used to the pain and the discomfort, inured to the bitter cold and constant damp, and even relished the plain, often unpalatable food. He was well acquainted now with those working closest to him. Mr. Torse, the master gunner, was strict, but fair. He watched over the great ship's weapons like an anxious groom over his thoroughbred horses, and any careless damage that came to them put him in a towering rage. He demanded obedience and respect, but he listened to both sides of an argument, and the boys learned exactly how far they could go on tickling his sense of humour. John had learned to trust Mr. Torse, and wanted his good opinion. He was afraid of him only when the grog took hold. The fumes of rum and water seemed to inflame the master gunner's temper. He'd lash out over every small annoyance. Mr. Torse was a man to respect, but John had learned to love Jabez Barton, with his kindliness and slow Devon speech. He learned far more from 1 hour of Jabez's quiet, patient teaching than from a day under the lash of Mr. Higgins. There were moments each day when he was almost happy. Those usually came after supper, when the ship's work was done, and from the tables, nestling between the guns, came the sounds of men at ease, sitting over their grog, telling stories, whittling at sticks, singing songs, and reliving old battles, while the boys invented games and teased each other and wrestled. But there were many more times when he was miserably sad. The sight of a seagull flying free towards the land, or a Scottish seaman's voice ringing out from among the great variety of English ones, would set off an aching homesickness. Then every bit of him would long for Luxton and his father. An empty, hollow feeling would settle inside of him, a terrible loneliness. and not even Tom's banter, Davy's clumsy friendliness, or Kit's quiet sympathy could reach him. Damp, crowded ship seemed like a cruel, floating prison. The permanent stench and complete lack of privacy made him seethe with disgust and frustration. Often he was afraid. He had become used to going up aloft, faster than he would have thought possible. Shinning up the ratlins was nothing to him now. Although sidling out on the ropes along the yards still made his stomach lurch in alarm, especially in the storms of winter when the wind blew hard and the ship rolled and pitched on the swell. His first gale, when the ship was well out in the Bay of Biscay, tested the nerves of every man on board. For 2 days the hatches had been battened down, huge waves had washed over the sides, soaking the hammocks. The decks had been fouled, every man had been sick. And as the ship had plunged down and reared up again, John had thought time and again that his last hour had come. The storm had been bad enough, but a jolt of even sharper fear shot through him every time he caught sight of the round, shiny black hat of Mr. Higgins, and he saw the malice in the man's cold eyes. Gradually, alongside all the other feelings that crowded in upon him, a sense of pride had found its place too. The Fearless might be engaged only in the unglamorous routine work of patrolling backwards and forwards along the coast of France, but she was a great ship, a famous ship. She had fought under Nelson at the Nile and Trafalgar. She was a ship of the line, a man of war, and he was a man of war's boy now. He belonged to the Fearless. She was his ship. But always, in the back of John's mind, especially after gun drill, was the knowledge that one day the Fearless would go into battle. One day a French ship would attempt to break the blockade and slip out from the mouth of the river, or would try to approach from the sea and batter her way past the Fearless to reach Bordeaux. Then her great guns would not boom out against the open ocean, but would blast their deadly load of hot metal into the sides of an enemy ship, ripping away her masts and rigging, and the enemy would respond in kind. When that moment came, many would die. More would be injured, limbs would be shot away, faces scarred for life. I'm not sure I'm brave enough, he whispered to himself, a sick feeling in his stomach. I want to run down and hide in the hold. I mustn't even think of it. I can't wait. I just can't get another pop at the Frenchies, Tom Todd said one day, as they all sat down to dinner. He was pointing an imaginary musket at an invisible target, making the others duck as he swung it round the table. When we took the St. Colombe a year ago, it was the best fun. Oh, John, you ought to have been there. You'd have loved it right enough. I know you would. You told him all about it before, Tom, murmured Kit. Tom ignored him and swept his invisible musket round again. We closed in on her, off Brest, passing her to a windward, shortened sails and hove to, then crash! Our guns gave her a broadside, and a broadside from the Fearless is something no one will ever forget. She came back with answering fire, of course, and phew, but it was awful close. A cannonball came that near to taking my head right off its shoulders, and then we boarded her, and you didn't, interrupted Kit. Mr. Torse sent you below when the firing ceased. Get below, you imp of Satan, he said, copying Mr. Torse's voice so well that the others laughed. Dancing about like a sandfish on a rotten jellyfish. I heard him. When you came back up, it was all finished. Anyway, it wasn't a proper fight at all, Mr. Barton says, because the French sailors were half dead with scurvy. Mr. Barton said he'd never seen such a sorry lot of poor fellows. Poor fellows? They were French! Tom's eyes sparkled with scorn. Every one of them is a Johnny Crappold. Snails for their dinner and the stink of garlic on them all. One Scotsman's a match for 10 of them, my daddy always says. Kit frowned and seemed to be about to say something, but changed his mind. What do they do if someone's killed? Said John, as casually as he could. Over the side and into the deep, said John cheerfully, tipping his arms in a graphic demonstration. But first they sews you, nice and tight, into your hammock, said Davy, coming suddenly to life. And down you go to the bottom, and all the little fishes have a nice dinner. And the crabs. 'Twon't happen to me, though. Fortune teller told me so. I'm to live till I'm 70, and marry a beautiful dark-haired lady, and travel to foreign parts, and see signs and wonders. You really believe all that? Scoffed Tom. Yes, she said, replied Davy simply. I'd rather be eaten by fish than maggoty old worms anyway, said John, who'd been giving the matter some thought. Though not crabs. I don't like the idea of crabs. Kit, who'd been mending the cuffs of Mr. Torce's best blue uniform coat, held it out to Tom, so he could cut through the thread with his pocket knife. You make me shiver with all this talk of fishes and maggots, he said disdainfully. The canvas screen moved aside then, and Nate Claypole's sharp, ferrety face appeared. Come to make trouble, have you, rat-face? Tom said rudely. Who are you calling a thief this time? Davy looked anxious. Not me. I never took nothing. Been mucking out the pigs all day. A nervous smile crossed Nate's face. I just came to see you. He was eyeing the table of boys warily as he approached. Never said sorry to you, John, like it ought to. I know it was a long time ago. I was hoping you'd forgot about it. It was Mr. Higgins who set me up. I knowed you wasn't no thief. I wanted to tell you all this time. And what did he pay you, you wee swindler? Jeered Tom. Nothing. Nate slid on the chest beside Kit. He's that mean. You don't know the half of it. If anything, I would be back in here, messing with the lot of you. You should have thought of that before you went a-sneaking off to him, said Tom severely. I know. I've paid for it, look. He lifted his shirt to show his thin, bony back. The other four took in their breath sharply as they saw the mass of welts and bruises that covered it. Beats me up for nothing, he did. All the time, sniffed Nate, wiping a sleeve across his nose. His last lap, he couldn't take it no more. Jumped over the side one night, off Yarmouth. Drowned dead before he ever reached the shore, I reckon. The little fishies will be happy then, said Davy, he almost pleased at the thought. John had been watching Nate closely, saying nothing, as he tried to work out if the boy was sincere, or whether he had come on an underhand errand for the boatswain's mate. But Nate's misery was unmistakable, and there was something like pleading in his close-set eyes as he turned his face towards John. Is there something you want, Nate? John said, puzzled. He was unable to help himself, feeling sorry for him. Yeah, Nate said, looking grateful. He's on about that satchel of yours again. The one he swears you brought on board. My satchel? John stared in surprise. But why? There's nothing in it. Only old stuff of my father's. And why has he remembered it now? I thought he'd given that up months and months ago. There ain't no satchel in Kit's chest now, said Davy. Weren't one in there yesterday, anyways. The others turned on him accusingly. Davy, exploded Tom. I'm warning you. I'm telling you. Next time you poke your fat fingers into someone else's chest, I'll have you taken up for a thief. You'll be hanged from the yardarm. But I haven't got a chest of my own, Tom, Davy said reasonably. And I didn't take anything. Just stowed my little bit of mirror away. Horace, he likes my little bit of mirror. He liked to tap his beak on it. And it's like I said, there weren't no satchel in there. Where'd you hide it, Kit? Nate stood up. I don't want to know nothing about no satchel, he said quickly. I don't even want to know if there ever was one, or where it is if it's in there. Mr. Higgins would beat it out of me, quick as a wink if he got a sniff of it. Yes, but why? Said John. No point in asking me, is there? Complained Nate. He's a deep one, is Mr. Higgins. Very restless he's been lately. When that frigate brought letters a week ago, he received one that sent him into the vilest temper I ever seed. Beat me black and blue, he did, just 'cause I dropped his second best hat and dented it. These last few days I seen him up on deck at night with his dark lantern. More than once I seen him flashing the light out into the dark, as if there's someone out there. Calling up the mermaids, that's what he's doing, Davy said knowledgeably. Beautiful girl mermaids there are, with long golden hair. I'd like to see a mermaid. Pah! Tom elbowed him with a sigh of disgust. Sounds like he was sending signals. Out to where? Nate shrugged. How should I know? Towards the coast of France or out to sea. Kit had put his sewing down and was watching Nate intently. Not a bleeding navigator, am I? Nate said aggrieved. In the dark it was and all. Did anyone answer? Was there a signal back? Not that I saw. Here, there's the bell. I'd best be off to polish his shoes, or he'll break my arm, like he said he would. A moment later he was gone. Davy stood up and went across to the tiller beam, where Horace was sitting, with his head tucked under his wing. He began crooning to the bird and stroking his head. John, Tom, and Kit sat and looked at each other in silence. I'll look through the satchel again, John said at last, getting up to retrieve it from where it had been stowed, half forgotten behind a bulkhead. There must be some answer to this mystery. There has to be.